Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, no, I've been following you for a while and I go, "Well, how do we get her on? What are we talking about?" And so I said, we're just going to talk to her. Let's let's
Perfect.
let's figure this thing out. And you can talk about all your work and stuff, right? There's nothing you need to hold back.
I don't think so. Um,
All right. Because we
yeah, the
found some
only no.
research.
Was that sorry?
We found some research.
You found some research?
You found some research. What kind of
People always
English
say
language is that?
I ask people, is there anything you don't want us to talk about? He goes, whoa, it depends. What did you find? So
Oh, oh, that kind of research, yeah. No, I don't think there's anything I can't talk about.
yeah.
The only thing would be like participant confidentiality, but that's not usually an issue. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think we're good.
Are we allowed to bring up people we know that you've worked with, because you have posted that?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, all my participants sign a confidentiality waiver essentially
Yeah.
before I post that stuff.
Cool.
So anything that's been posted in public, they've consented to that, and we can discuss all of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we're looking for the juice on like Burrows and Miles and others. So just so you know.
Who's the
Yeah.
most fit drummer and who's like wildly out of shape?
Well, that I can't tell you.
Oh, so there is. Okay.
Hi, the following podcast is brought to you by Radical Road Brewery, the best craft beer in the heart of Leslieville. Find them at 1177 Queen Street East. That's Radical Road Brewery.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Nadia Azar. I am an associate professor of kinesiology at the University of Windsor, where I do research on rock stars. Welcome to the music.
Welcome. Dr. Nadia, it's a pleasure to have you join us. Really looking forward to diving into this topic. It's it's very different than a lot of the discussions that we've had. So very excited about that. I do want to start off. I know you talk about, and we'll get into it in terms of drummers being athletes, but I do want to say that back when I was a musician back in the day, I burnt more than my fair share of calories rocking the guitar. Okay, so let's do a level set here. Anyway, what I was where I really want to go is it's fascinating. I think of, I curled for many years. It's interesting. As a kid, Ed Wernick, who was a world champion curler, I remember I was a kid at the Whitby Curling Club, and he'd be sitting there with his smokes and his glass of, rye and ginger or whatever he was drinking. We're playing Pac-Man and just hanging out kind of thing, right? Fast forward to today, and, a friend of Karim's and mine, and through mutual friends, John Epping, talks about, how disciplined the team need to be. And it's just very different. You look at race car drivers, and, you can look at a number of professions. So, I think it's really interesting. I'd love to get to know more. You talk about, your overall goal is to deliver to drummers what athletes are getting. How did you, where did this come from? How did you, I know you're, through your practice, but how did you get here, if I may ask?
It was very serendipitous. So this was probably 6 or so years ago now. I wasn't big on social media at the time, but I followed a few people. And one of the drummers that I followed was Mike Mangini of Dream Theater, because I'm a huge Dream Theater fan. And he tweeted out something one day about being sore from playing the drums, but not because he was hurt, but because it was more of like a boxing type workout. And I had actually just read a study on like muscle activation in MMA fighters, and I thought, oh, this is too good to pass up. So I tweeted something back at him, and he wrote back to me, and then we were, DMing, and we had a conversation over Skype. And then I started looking at literature and realized there was not a whole lot of research in the area of drumming performance from a physical performance angle, or anything really on injuries and injury prevention, and like basically ergonomics in drumming. So that's all my training, and most of my research up till then had been in biomechanics and ergonomics and injury prevention, but mainly with like automotive injuries, or like both from manufacturing and from the actual cars, riding in a car. And so I just decided, well, I'll just take that stuff and apply it to drummers. And that's where, Mike was the first person I collected data on live on stage. Jeff Burrows was shortly after that. They were kind of the first two that I did. And then you mentioned Danny Miles. I think it was actually, we posted Jeff's data, and I'm pretty sure Danny commented and being like, you got to do me next. And then that just kind of like is how it all went from there. And, I just did my 45th data collection with the drummer Saturday night.
That's amazing.
So, yeah.
So what you were in, do we call it medicine? You were in medicine already. You were looking for a doctor to do, like, where were you in life when you said, I need to contact this drummer and measure his output?
Yeah, I was already a solid 10 years into my career at the University of Windsor. Okay. Yeah, I finished my PhD in 2009, and I was already working at the university by then. And so through the years, I was doing, different projects. And this just kind of came up and fell in my lap. And we're very blessed that we are able to pursue really any line of research that we want to, provided that it, aligns with our department's mission and our position. I was hired to teach biomechanics and ergonomics. So, as long as I'm staying somewhere in that lane or near it, we can do whatever we want. So it was very easy for me to pivot to that. And my dean at the time was very supportive, thought it was a really interesting take. And so, yeah.
Because you like, I know you don't call yourself a drummer, but you've drummed.
No. Yes.
You can play Enter Sandman.
I don't know well, actually, I probably still could if that muscle memory is still there. I tried it not that long ago. I've always been, music has always been a part of my life. I took music lessons as a kid, multiple instruments, dabbled in others just for fun, drums being one of them. And then I married a drummer whose brother, one of his brothers, is also a drummer. So it's just always been around. And so when this kind of came up, it was, actually, the funny thing is, going back to Mike Mangini's tweet, a few weeks before that tweet, my husband and I were at a Dream Theater concert, and I was watching Mike, and I leaned over to my husband in the middle of a rock show and said, oh my God, imagine how cool it would be if I could get Mike Mangini to come to my lab so I could hook him up to all my equipment in the middle of a rock show. And so, yeah, it never goes away. But so this is just kind of how it just kind of all came together, and just landed in my lap, and I was able to pursue it. And yeah, it's just been a lot of fun and really interesting.
It must be amazing, like, just being a music fan, having musicians in your family, and then combining, the work that you're doing for the university and your passion. And it almost seems like, oh, that's so amazing, to be able to combine the two. Like, how was that? Like, did it change? Did it give you a bolt of energy? Was it, did you think that, maybe they won't go for this because it's too much fun?
No, I didn't think that. Although I did early on wonder if they would take it seriously. But it has been, but then I also stumbled on, performing arts medicine as a whole field in and of itself. And there's lots of people out there doing similar types of work, but basically dealing with health issues across the spectrum that performing artists face. So everything from dancers to vocalists to instrumentalists. I'm forgetting the group, actors,
Sure.
And all the gamut of the health problems, from like mental health to hearing, care to physical injuries, that sort of thing. It definitely, especially when I'm collecting data at these live shows and I'm sitting side stage and doing this stuff and thinking, I'm at work right now,
Yeah.
technically. It's it definitely has injected some,
You
I
have
mean, I
found
always enjoyed my job, but this is definitely taken it to
you have
another level.
found a way to have your boss pay for rock shows. This
No,
this
not
come
quite.
on. Come on.
So it's funny, like speaking on one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I've read a couple of things when you're talking about, I'll use the word chasing funding for lack of a better word, but, it's, I'm keen to know what that's like for you to get funding to support, your research in, a fun, fairly niche, I think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm totally wrong.
No, you're not wrong.
Set of research or body of research.
Yeah, it's, I haven't tried the the Canadian federal funding agencies for this yet specifically. Although we're actually waiting like any day now for the results of a grant that I put in with 5 other percussion professors from across Canada to develop a percussion network across the country. So we'll see about that, because there's more than just health in that one. There's lots of different aspects that will be involved. So that might be, but you're right. When I think about, okay, where can I apply to get money for this? It is somewhat difficult because I don't quite fit. Like I've looked at, SOCAN and like some of the other arts type funding programs, but they mainly fund artists to go record stuff or perform or do things like that. And that's not what I do. But also going to the more like medical and engineering side, it is very niche and funding dollars are limited. And so, are they going to fund that when they could fund a study that's going to like improve safety measures in car crashes?
Fair, yeah.
And you're right. Fair is right. I get it. But that's where, I was very fortunate. I found the Grammy Foundation, the Grammy Museum.
Exactly.
And they fund scientific research. And so once I had a few years of doing this and I had some data and I had, a good foundation, I was able to apply and I was successful. And so I got $20,000 from the Grammy Museum as one of 5 projects that was funded in the year that I got it to do a study on drumming. And this one is particularly looking at drumming education and the inclusion of injury prevention within drum set curriculum.
Wow.
So is there other avenues to funding that are like that sort of, I guess, marry the two versus going the SOCAN route or going the...
I haven't found any yet. It's tough. I have to look at other foundations or even corporations that might, like, I know we looked at this for a project we were doing years ago. But I think it was like Coca-Cola or Pepsi funds scientific research for it's like they have this foundation and stuff. So there might be some things like that I could try. Maybe I can get, what's that new water that comes in a can? It's like Liquid Death. And they sell it at concerts now. I'm like, maybe I can go to them and they'll fund it.
Okay.
But yeah, I definitely think I have to go, foundations and private funding route, because I mean, I can try the others and I will, but I think it will be a challenge to get this through.
Okay. I didn't know funding was like a big issue or anything like that. I thought, working at the university would fund some of that stuff, but
no, I mean, they can't, because there's so many of us that we have some funds every year that we can use for like professional development. You mentioned, the university paying for me to go to concerts. Not quite, but I have money that I can use to go to conventions and, things like that. But yeah, as far as the research goes, we get some money when we first start. And then after that, you're responsible for generating your own research funding.
Yeah. So as you start to collect data, let's talk about Jeff Burrows.
Okay.
You hook him up to your machines. You're measuring his output. What is at the beginning? what are you interested in finding?
Mhm.
And maybe if you can tell us whether it's Jeff or just drummers in general, what are they interested in understanding?
Okay. So again, this branch of my research program came about because of a tweet again from Mike Mangini,
Yeah.
where he was guessing at how many calories he burns during a show.
Okay. All right.
And by this time, we had already been in touch. And so I emailed him and said, hey, I have these devices. They're really portable. There's no wire, like nothing that's going to get in your way while you're playing. I could bring them to one of your shows and you could wear them and we can find out. And he was like, yeah, let's do that. So we did. And then that's where, Jeff had heard about this too. And so he said, yeah, I'll do the same. So I did that with him as well.
Yeah.
So it started off as, like how many calories am I burning up there? They all know that they're working hard.
Yeah.
Right. So to be able to quantify that in some way, I think they get a kick out of that.
Okay.
And then when I added the heart rate monitoring too, a lot of them were really interested in that. I have one of them said he was going to take, because I give them a report at the end, once I've analyzed all their data. And he said, he's like, I'm going to take this to my cardiologist and see if there's like anything of interest for him there. I was like, that sounds cool. But so, they all have different sort of interests, but most of them, I think, come at it from, part of it is the cool factor of like seeing other people do it and, oh, that's really neat, I should try that. And for a lot of them, though, I think it is, a lot of them, they're like, oh, I wear an Apple Watch or a Garmin, when I play. So I'd like to see what your devices say.
Okay.
So it's kind of from a general interest perspective too. But then they get this information. They're like, oh, that's, that peak heart rate is really high, things like that. So.
And what are you hoping, like, what were you outside of, calories burned, like, is there anything else that you were interested in finding out that could, I don't know, help make a drummer's career last longer or give a drummer less pain after a show? Or, oh my goodness, the drummer for U2, Larry Mullins, right? Who's taking a year or two off, and is famously missing a Las Vegas residency, apparently.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, because he's just not ready to come back and drum. Before Neil Peart passed away, he talked about it's just so painful for me to continue doing this. So I'm curious if any of them are coming from that angle, or if you as both a doctor and a fan of music saying, I wonder if there's an impact I can make to help the music last longer.
Absolutely. So in all actuality, this, live performance energy expenditure branch of my study is really, it's interesting, it's fun, but it's largely a gateway to talk about, you see drummers up there, they're working hard, they come down from the kit, they're dripping with sweat. Here's how hard they're working in terms of calories and heart rate. Okay, that opens the door for the conversation of, if they're working that hard, what is that doing to their body? And are they preparing their bodies to be able to handle the demands that they're putting on it? So it opens up conversations about, this is where the whole drummers are athletes comes from, is, those, the heart rates that I'm recording from these guys and girls, they are up around the same level as professional athletes. During competitive match play, there was one paper on Italian soccer players during competitive match play, and they were very close to the numbers that I was getting. So professional athletes don't just practice their sport. They go through lots of conditioning so that their bodies are prepared to do what they needed to do during a game situation and be successful. And they engage in a lot of, different activities to make sure that they can continue playing for as long as possible and playing at their peak for as long as possible and things like that. So all of those things are things that I, try to apply with drummers. And so like all the rest of the research that I do, or most of the rest of it, is related to injuries and injury prevention. So looking at things like, how common are injuries in drummers? They're very, very common. What are the most common types? Okay, now that I know that, I know the general risk factors for those types of injuries. Do those show up in drummers? Yes, they do. Okay, there's now a link between the injuries we're seeing and the mechanisms that we know that they happen by. That's why. So now I can say, okay, how do we handle that? How do we deal with that to minimize the risk of injury from drummers' exposures to those risk factors that can lead to the injuries happening?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, leaving aside Travis Barker's injuries that happen outside of drumming that impact his drumming. No,
Yeah.
but jokes aside, when I look at, when I would look at the data that you had put out with Jeff Burrows with the 2 albums, and then Danny Miles with I think it was at least one show, but anyway, looking by song, do you see, or what difference do you see in types of music, style of drumming? Like I'm thinking of a double kick speed metal drummer versus a laid back person like Charlie Watts would have been, kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's really interesting actually, because I've been able to learn a lot about these different styles of music and their demands through doing this too. So I get this question all the time of like, oh, what about speed metal drummers? What about, those guys? That must be off the charts. And it's up there, but they're not really any higher than your, the rest of the rock drummers. And I've also had some pop and country drummers, and they're pretty much in the same range. And I've had some rock drummers who are actually, on the lower end because so Todd Sucherman from Styx is who I'm talking about here. He had one of the lowest heart rates of the group. Styx is some pretty energetic music, but Todd, first of all, is a highly economical drummer in terms of how he moves. And he also told me, he's talked about this, that he really works on maintaining his calm and relaxation while he's playing. And that really showed up in his heart rate. So I haven't done enough drummers from the other genres to really do a proper comparison. But from what I've been able to see, it really has more to do with the style of the drummer than the style of the music. Because the other thing is with, a lot of the speed metal drummers, like you're talking about the double kick, and it's, they're doing a lot of that, but they're also, a lot of them aren't maybe hitting as hard because they have to go fast. And so it's maybe not as strenuous. Like, yes, they're moving very fast, but it's sometimes not moving very much. You know what I mean? So it kind of balances it out. But yeah, that was a really interesting thing, because I like everyone else thought like, oh, that's gonna be crazy, and that's not what I'm seeing.
You did was it an 800 person survey? What were you asking, and what did you find out that surprised you?
Yeah, so that was sort of the foundational study for my lab. That was the starting point for all of it. How big of a problem is this for drummers? And it was all about injuries. So I asked them about whether they'd ever had a playing related injury, and what, did they get a diagnosis from a medical professional? What was it? What did they do about it? All kinds of questions about their drum set, their practice habits, their performance habits, whether they tour, like all kinds of everything I could think of. I had it was mainly driven through social media, and I had over 800 drummers. It was 862 drummers who filled it out from all over the world.
Wow.
Which was really cool. But yeah, so that study is where we saw, okay, they're like 68% of that group said they had experienced an injury. 59% said they'd had more than one, 2 or more, basically.
Wow.
But we were also able to say, okay, like we had a body map. So, okay, where was the injury? So I was able to look at the breakdown of which parts are being injured the most. Predictably, the upper limb is, the most, because that's taking the brunt of the exertion. But I was able to narrow it down. Like the wrist is a really big problem for them, and also the low back. So now we were like, okay, now that we know that, let's hone in. Let's do some other studies that kind of hone in on where these injuries, these wrist injuries in particular, might be coming from. So then we did a study in the lab where we brought in drummers and hooked them up to our motion capture system. And we were able to look at their upper limb postures while they're playing. to see what kind of ranges of motion they're getting into and document how much time they're spending in what we would consider non-neutral or even extreme postures. And it was a lot. And so it's like, okay, well, that kind of explains why we're seeing all these wrist injuries, because they're spending a whole lot of time with their wrists bent like this and hitting while hitting stuff. We did a study that looked at vibration exposure in drummers. So from all the repeated impacts, and they're experiencing levels that if the readings that we're getting were something that we had measured on a tool that's being used on an assembly line, the company would be like, stop everything. Wow. We need to get rid of that tool. We need to switch it with a new one. We need to change different how long workers are on that job, because the exposures are at levels that are clearly in the range where we would start to expect to see problems. So that, so we're slowly gathering evidence to back up, okay, yes, it's a problem. We know it's a problem in these areas. Why? So that we can then say, what do we do about it? Yeah. And help people, prolong their playing careers and play comfortably. And, because lots of drummers play in pain. When you're on tour, there's no substitute worker. Like you can't just call in sick because you're sore that day. So, trying to minimize how much that happens is really important for musicians.
And there's a bunch of questions that I've got out of what you just said there. But the first one I want to ask is, you talk about vibration, you talk about movement. Is there, and I don't mean continual impact, but are there impact injuries? And like, how prominent would those be relative to the motion and the vibration? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I know anecdotally of drummers who have, smacked their finger. They just like misread where things are in space and smash their fingers on the rim of their snare drum. And at the end of the show, the kit's covered in blood and all that kind of stuff. But those aren't really, so that happens, but those aren't the kinds of injuries that I'm concerned about. Obviously that's concerning. You don't want that to happen, but I'm more concerned about the kind of stuff that sneaks up on them and that could potentially, significantly impact, if not ruin their career if it's not dealt with. So those kinds of injuries, the stuff that comes more from, the repetitive motion or the extreme postures or the high forces, vibration exposure, that kind of stuff. I'm more thinking about those kinds of injuries and what I can do about them.
Yeah. Okay. And do you get into the equipment side of it? Like, I'm just thinking, the throne, the sticks, the heads, like, does that come into play in your research or?
It hasn't yet, but it's on the radar. Yeah. Okay. There are definitely some equipment things that I want to look into. Yeah, for sure. But we haven't gone there yet because we just haven't had the chance to. I mean, we've only, that first study that I did was in 2018. And, it's 2023, that is 5 years, but for 18 months during a pandemic, we couldn't do anything because the lab was shut down. So, we're slowly getting back to it. And I do definitely want to do more product type research.
Could be your funding. Could be your next round of funding.
That would be awesome. Yeah, you never know.
So you've had drummers come back into the lab, or you've remeasured drummers a couple of years later, maybe. What are you looking for when you put them through that again? When you bring them back in your lab, are you and what are they interested to see?
So the one that you might be alluding to is Chuck Como from Simple Plan. Yeah. So that was a long span of time. And Chuck happened to be playing in Windsor. And he also, and I can say this because again, he said it was okay to talk about it. He came to my actual lab to do a different study when he was here for a show in November. He came and did the vibration study that I was talking about. All right. But they were in town. He's like, hey, if you want to do the other monitors during the show again, let's see what happens. So I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. It's hard to make real good comparisons between shows that far apart for several reasons. There are any number of variables that are different between now and then, not the least of which being he's 5 years older. So there's just differences in heart rate. I don't know if he did, but he may have had COVID once, twice, three times. Like I don't know that, but that could impact his heart activity during a show. The first set of shows that we did were in early July at Warped Tour in 90, 100 degree heat and humidity, compared to the show in Caesars, the Forum at Caesars. It's air conditioned, it's November, that sort of thing. So there are so many things that are different that it's really hard to make like a good scientific comparison. But I think it was just interesting for him to take a look at it and see, like, actually, a lot of the songs were, in terms of heart rate and energy expenditure, were pretty close to the same. Like, I didn't really see huge differences. So, I guess that's a good thing.
I was just curious if maybe Chuck was looking for a more efficient way of playing, or decided after the first test, oh, maybe I need to go see someone and help me get, in better shape. If that was a thing, just, monitor my body and help it recover from injuries, and maybe I'm going to play a little bit differently. Or I was just curious about any of that. Have any of drummers told you that they're taking more proactive look at their career and really seeing themselves as athletes?
Yeah, a couple of them have, and that's obviously really rewarding to know that. So yeah, some of them who come in, are already athletic. They work out on tour. Sure. They take really good care of themselves. They know that this is, important to keep them able to do their thing. So that kind of gives them like, oh, okay, like I'm handling it. I can do what I need to do, but wow, that's high. And I have had a few who have, that I'm still in touch with, that have said things like, I'm doing this more, I'm doing this less, things like that. And if that in some way came from the data that I gave them, then that's, incredible. That's exactly the kind of impact that I want to be having. So yeah, that's really neat. But I want to circle back for a minute to the very beginning. You were talking about with the curling and the smoking and the drinking, all that stuff, and how much things have changed now. And it's actually, I've found it to be very similar with the musicians. The perception of the rock star life and the parties and the drinking and the this and the that. I've been backstage often enough now to know that that's really not often a thing. Or because they all are just aware that they have to take care of themselves, that this is their career. They have to take it seriously to be able to play well and to be able to handle 5 shows a week for 6 weeks or whatever, however long they're on tour. If you're drinking every night and not taking care of yourself, like, you're going to be really beat up by the end of that tour. And it can start to impact your playing. And I think a lot of, like I said, a lot of the drummers that I've worked with already are, working out, and they're not, they try to eat well while they're on the road, and they stay hydrated, and they do like these things to keep themselves in good shape. So I think, you mentioned in the sports world, I think that has happened everywhere, that people are taking performance and health seriously. And not that they don't, have their fun, but that it's not the, that
the
kind of thing.
rock and roll lifestyle.
Yeah. Like not
John
not
Bonham.
as much.
Yeah, for sure.
And the way music, the industry has changed so much that, playing is now like the thing that they must do to have a lifestyle. And so, that's it's not releasing new music anymore. It's like being on the road and getting people to buy merch at their shows and come to their shows. That's where they make their money, right? So
that's right. And you can't, if touring is one of the only avenues of revenue that they have anymore, you can't suck live. Like, you just can't, because then nobody's going to want to come to your show. So yeah, and I think there's an awareness of that. So they're doing everything they can to make sure that they're performing really well so that people want to come to their shows and will spend the money to do it.
Yeah,
So
and all drumming jokes aside, if you don't have a good solid drummer, I mean that's your foundation. That's absolutely your foundation.
yeah, like if your time is off because you're hungover or something, that's gonna make everything bad. Yeah.
When going back to what you were talking about in terms of like, you know, drummers being, and again, I think it's many professions, but when you talk about drummers being more looking at their health and eating well and that, you talked about earlier, you know, drummers that were in the groove and sort of just like pacing themselves and that their heart rates were lower, even though they were, you know, killing it on the kit. Do you find drummers are looking at yoga and breathing exercises to help with that, or?
I've spoken to a few. Yoga's come up a few times.
Okay.
Meditation and breathing comes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely an awareness of the mental side. And I'm not just talking about mental health, I'm talking about like mental performance too. You know, being an aware that like that needs some work and some preparation too, and paying attention to that aspect will also help your physical performance while you're on stage. So yeah, I think, you know, that is starting to come in quite a bit.
How did the pandemic impact? Obviously, you couldn't get people into the lab. There were no shows. What sort of research or work did you do for those 18 plus months?
Yeah, that you know, I always tried to keep the perspective that, you know, as sad as I was that I couldn't be out, you know, doing shows and in the lab doing research and stuff, that was only peripherally connected to my livelihood. And so I tried to remember that, like, you know, while I'm here saying boo-hoo, my friends and you know, and people that I've worked with are out there like not doing what they, you know, how they make their money, but also their passion, right? So, you know, in that sense, I was, you know, always able to keep, or mostly able to keep perspective. But yeah, it definitely impacted us because we couldn't, you know, there were no live shows, so obviously that was done. Even when live shows started to come back, especially like I do a lot of my data collection in Detroit. The US's COVID restrictions loosened up a lot quicker than Ontario's did. So I would have drummers like, hey, I'm going to be in Detroit. Let's do this thing. And I'll be like, I can't because I can't cross the border, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, that impacted us. To be able to do that, even when you could travel, but now you need a COVID test. And, you know, are you going to be able to get the results in time to be able to get back to Canada without having to quarantine and like all these considerations. And then also the safety protocols. You know, we still, the one sort of last thing that we're still doing is we do still mask up when we are putting, like when we're within 6 feet, when we can't maintain physical distance, especially if it's going to be for a little while we're hooking someone up to equipment. So, you know, I posted a picture of myself and Pete Weber, who was playing with Fear Factory. That's who I was working with Saturday night. And in the picture, we're wearing masks because we're indoors and it's a university requirement that we have to wear them. And, you know, some people were commenting about it and, you know, what have you, but, you know, it is what it is. At least I can be there now. But our, you know, it was, I had 2 grad students who were, you know, just about to start data collection and they had to wait and, you know, so that delayed them. And then the projects couldn't be what we had originally intended for them to be because, you know, they were now delayed. Like they want to get on with their lives. So it's like, okay, instead of doing like 20 participants, we're going to do a case study with 6, you know, and like to try to get them like moving forward. So this year I've been on sabbatical since last July, and the big part of my sabbatical has been just catching up on a lot of the research that I haven't been able to do. So yeah, so it definitely did impact us, but it also gave me time to write the grant for the Grammy Museum, which was successful, and then also, get started with that project, and which is still ongoing, and do those kinds of things too. So I don't want to say I would have written that grant anyway, but maybe
Yeah.
I had a little extra time to do it because I wasn't doing other things. So yeah.
That's nice.
Mm.
What's next for the lab, for the drummers lab?
What is next? Well, right now we're in a bit of a transition.
Okay.
So I had, my students who were with me when the pandemic started. Uh, Two of them have graduated. A third one is doing her data collection now, although she's not working with drummers, she's working with conductors.
Oh,
It's kind of a one-off study, but it's pretty cool. So, and so I'm going to be bringing in at least one, if not two more new students in the fall. So like time to start kind of regenerating, wrapping up these other projects so we can kind of reevaluate and say, okay, what do we want to do next? I have tons of ideas floating out there, but it's a matter of picking the ones that make the most sense to, build a progression from the previous work. So basically that, a bit of,
okay.
wrapping up that stuff and then doing a little debriefing and decision making about what we want to do going forward. But it'll definitely still be with drummers, and it'll definitely still
Okay.
be, in this line of work. It's just a matter of like which particular projects do we want to go for next.
Have lead guitarists, bass players, like Gregg keytars, have they come to you and said, "Hey, what about us?"
I have had I've had a couple who have
Okay.
said that they were a couple singers actually
All
who have
right.
said
Of
they were
course, of
interested
course, the
in.
singers.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I'm kidding. Just, sorry.
but they're pretty energetic, right? But or they can be anyway. So I've had a couple who have wanted to. I haven't actually done it yet,
All right.
but there's one in particular who I can't name because we, that confidentiality thing
Mhm.
hasn't been waived yet. So it's a matter of when they come around to the area and getting it done, basically.
Okay.
But I still want to, yeah, I mean, the temptation has been there to branch out into multiple other instruments. And I'm kind of like, no, because that's my, I think a lot of researchers do this. Like you want to do everything, but
Yeah.
then you get spread too thin. And so I'm trying to say, nope, stay the course, stick with this group. There's enough variables with them as it is.
Yeah.
So just kind of, keep it in that lane and continue on.
That's fascinating. Any drummers you'd love to hook up to your? I gotta say this properly. Any drummers you'd like to put into the no? No, honestly, any drummers you haven't studied yet that you want to study?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would love to get Nico McBrain.
Hmm.
Um, that's a big one. I just found out today that Godsmack is coming around, so Shannon Larkin would be great.
Okay.
I do. So I have, I started in rock and metal, and that's where most of my participants are because it really does kind
Sure.
of snowball.
Yeah.
But I need to get more drummers in other genres. So trying to get more drummers, like pop drummers in. So, more people in that domain.
Yeah.
And even country, same thing. Who are the country drummers? And getting, I have a few, again, like lined up, want to do it, but just haven't been around. So yeah, I don't, I've been very fortunate that I've been able to work with, a lot of the drummers that I would really want to from a
Mhm.
selfish personal angle. The drummers of my three favorite bands, I've worked with all of them.
Nice.
So, that's really cool. And a lot of the Canadian drummers, I think was it Bayfest in Sarnia last summer? There was the lineup. I was like, 5 of the 7 drummers are people I've worked with, and they were all Canadian drummers. So
That's
that
great.
was really cool. Yeah. So getting it. Oh, Daniel Adair. I'd love to get Nickelback's drummer. In
Nice.
the lab, that would be cool. Yeah. So it's just a matter of trying to connect and see if we can make it happen.
Is there a difference? You've talked about, not too much difference with genres, but playing style. Is there a difference between genders?
So once again, haven't had a big enough sample to be able to determine that.
Yeah.
But from the females that I have worked with and was able to get data. So one of the things that I do, so yeah, we do look at like, how many calories they've burned, but you have to remember that calories are burned through muscle mass and like active tissues using energy, right? So the more muscle mass you have, the more energy you're going to burn. So we look at, I can't just compare, well, this drummer burned this many calories and that drummer burned this many, and he's working way harder. When you divide their calories per kilogram body weight per minute, they're right on par.
Interesting.
And again, it's not a big sample. I've only had 3 that I've been able to get data on. But when I look at when I scale all the participants' data, those 3 end up like right in the middle of the pack. So,
have you hooked yourself up?
No, I haven't. I mean, I've used the heart rate monitor several times myself because it's just a polar. You can buy them at, Sport Check, basically. But no, I haven't actually done that. But actually, that is, we talk about future research, that is something that I do want to do is, I've worked with all these professional drummers in live show situations. What about just playing drums in your basement for half an hour? Is that still it's probably not as intense, but is it still at an intensity level that could be considered exercise? I believe it could be, but that's something that I want to do is start getting just people who are playing in their living room, in their basement, just for fun and see what that does. So that's definitely a route that we're going to go at some point.
Wow.
So you talk about the average person at home. Are there any? And I didn't mean to refer to Karim that way, but are there any learnings that can be applied to the average Joe or Jane, like, or your thoughts in general from what you've learned and what you've observed that can be applied to Karim and myself?
Yeah, I definitely do think so. Acknowledging that all my energy expenditure and heart rate data is in this live show, situation, I still think it's still exertion. It's still 4 limbs moving, sometimes very fast, sometimes hitting very hard. So I do think that the average drummer could consider that exercise if they, sit down and play 5, 6, 7 songs that are pretty high intensity. They get all the way through them. I think it probably does constitute exercise. But even the injury prevention stuff that we're doing, students are not immune to this. So you see these injuries in first and second year college students. And again, not just in drummers, in other musicians too. Anybody who's spending that much time doing an activity, and it's, similar postures, it's similar, the repetitive exposure to those different risk factors, they can also develop injuries that could ruin their career before they even get started. So, trying to talk to students, and that's a big part of the Grammy Museum funded project, is talking to drum set teachers about the reasons why they do or don't teach injury prevention, so that I can start targeting, what do they need to be able to do this more, so that they can impart this to their students, so that they can hopefully prevent an injury by being aware of these things before it even develops. Or when they start to feel those twinges of, oh, I learned about this, I better look at changing something. Or, keep an eye on this and don't let it go too far, because drumming is not supposed to hurt. Like that's not part of the package. It's not, it shouldn't, you can do things to make that not happen. So if they know that early on, we can deal with it before it gets to be hugely problematic.
And it's interesting because if you think about it, it just dawned on me, like pro athletes have that entire infrastructure that you feel the tweak, the lower body injury, whatever it happens to be, right? They have an entire structure behind them where musicians don't. So,
yeah, and that's where, the Performing Arts Medicine Association that I belong to, and there are a few throughout the world, that's where we're all trying to work in that direction to be able to support performing artists in taking those, the things that we know from sports science and ergonomics and all those other things, and bringing that into the performing arts realm, because it is physically intensive and you can get hurt doing it if you're not, paying attention to these things. But people don't I played the piano I took lessons for 9 years. Other than make sure you warm up, do some scales. Nobody talked to me about injuries and maybe because I wasn't going to go and be a professional pianist, so maybe they figured it didn't matter. But it just never really came up. I don't think people really thought about it in that context. Oh yeah, you probably could get hurt doing that if you did it often enough. So raising that awareness is really important.
Dr. Nadia, thank you so much
thank you.
Coming on and chatting with us about this. We've learned a lot, and on behalf of drummers and musicians, professionals, weekend drummers, kids that are just learning, I think the work that you're doing, whether it'll be a quick change or a slow change, I think over time there'll be an understanding amongst music teachers that we need to teach these kids as well how to take care of their body so that they can just continue to play and enjoy music. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be on the podcast. Happy to be here.